I will introduce myself soon, but I need to go through a couple of comments about the title of of today. Good evening, by the way. Uh, uh, um, the title I proposed actually when Isaac asked me about the title, and I thought, oh, I want something provoking, something interesting, something that makes people come, which is, it seems, to work fairly. And thinking about that afterwards, I thought actually there are a couple of things that I don't want to, at least one major thing that I don't want to mix with my, let's say, research work or any or the subject that I'm talking about today, which is quite serious. And that is the part of the title is. At least for me, has some ironic tune or character. So what I want to say is actually the main point I'm going to talk about is key determinant of extremism. So, and that is general for both Muslim extremists and non-Muslim extremists. So that is a point I want to make, and just to make sure that you don't mistake my title, the like irony part of my title. A couple of words about me and my colleagues. I actually took the worst picture of them and the best picture of me, so just to make sure that you have a good idea about who we are. These are my colleagues, Milan and Robin. Robin was my my PhD student for a few years ago, and Milan was my my postdoc for a couple of years ago. They are both abroad mostly. Milan is at the CEREX, which is the Center for Extremism Research on Extremism in Oslo, and Robin is at Harvard, but also partly in Uppsala. And we do the work I have done on extremism. I have mostly done with these two guys, partly with the FOI and the Swedish Defense Research Institute, but partly within the university that I'm doing now. There is, if you look at what we have done, me, Milan, and Robin, and most of the time me, because I have done work before almost before they were born in the academia, at least. One issue that comes back and up again and again is the person situation debate. The main point or idea in the person situation debate is that can our behavior be explained by factors within us, or factors in the surrounding, in the situation. And there has been a quite this debate started in end of 60s, and I know people who actually the debate started with a critical psychologist called Walter Mischel, who is not alive anymore. And his name actually is mostly mentioned in conferences I go. When his name is mentioned, people avoid mentioning his name, but when they do it, they spit most of the time. So you have an idea how people think about Walter Mischel. But the idea was like personality researchers were explaining behavior within from the personality point of view. What Walter Mischel said, he actually tried to show that was not the case, that most of our behavior is determined by situational factors. For example, if you are nervous, stressed, or if I am that, it's because of the situation. It has nothing to do because of my, let's say, with my personality or personal characteristics or anything else, anything inside me. Which is today it's a quite weird idea, but it became popular at that time. And anyway, this kind of discussion or work actually is a red line in my work. So, and this is what you are going to see today. So I talk sometimes about the situation and sometimes about the person. Returning to the subject of today, we actually started, the idea of the work that I'm presenting today is started when one day we had a group discussion in the research group, and we started asking, we saw actually a couple of reports, not scientific reports. I think the Washington Post or New York Times did a review of the background of some terrorists. And that was mentioned in the discussion, and we thought, oh, this is interesting. We need to pick this up as a subject and do something about it. And when we started to look at that, this was like one of the first. I think this map is from 2014, and this is in connection with this map is in. It's in relation with the discussion. It's presented in relation with the discussion about refugees coming from Syria and where they go, how the refugee crisis occurred in different countries and so on. This is very interesting because you can see sometimes most people, or many people, I would say, are leaving Syria. That is the case in this map. And there are millions of them. So, and if I ask why, it's a very simple question. The situation is that it's not good, simply. So people leave Syria. There is nothing. You can, of course, have other explanation, but that is the major issue. But we have another map showing that there are people actually traveling to Syria, and they do pay a lot. They do a lot of work, and they do a lot of efforts to get to Syria, into the trouble zone or war zones. So actually, when we had these maps, or sort of the idea behind these maps in front of us, we thought we need to do something about this, at least, because we believe that there is something, something has to do with something that connects to the person situation debate, but also mainly the personality aspect of what we were interested in, the personality of the individuals who travel to war zones. Why do they seek extreme situations? It's here it started, but it's also a little later when we started reading and reviewing literature and seeing what we have got here. There was a couple of reviews that came out that actually were more systematic and were done, I would say, much better, more scientifically. Showing that nearly half of the Islamist terrorist attacks in the US since 2001, this is a recent report, were committed by US-born individuals. And the figures are not exactly the same, but they are roughly the same for Europe. Many individuals who are orchestrate or are involved in terror attacks, maybe not always the ones who execute the attacks, but many individuals around them, helping them and doing things with them to do what they intend to do, are actually born in Europe. So this was the first evidence for us to see, okay, we have something here. Are there differences between Western-born and foreign-born Muslims? That was the idea. We asked ourselves why, and we ended up, of course, in different variables that we, I would say, theoretically could wave away almost and say, oh, this is not explaining this. But one interesting variable is group-based relative deprivation. So this is what, if we think about the person situation debate, this is the situation factor that we are talking about. The other variable that could explain why these individuals are involved or interested in extreme acts is personality. And now I'm not thinking actually about clinical personality, because you might, there is a difference between clinical and non-clinical personality, in the sense that, for example, you have a personality, but you don't have any clinical diagnosis. So well, that is the case for most people. Absolutely, the majority of people on Earth, they have a personality, but they don't have anything that has to do with clinical. There is nothing wrong with them, simply. That is the normal personality. That makes us to be different from each other, to function the way we do, to smile, talk, do, act, and the way we do. So there are two important factors that we have looked at, and the group-based relative deprivation will take most of my time today. So I am focusing mostly on the situation, and that is because the paper we published recently, and the work on the personality aspect is ongoing, but I will present a short review of that for you anyway. Okay, and that is the paper I'm talking about, the group-based relative deprivation. Okay, what is group-based relative deprivation? Okay, that is a feeling of discontent that occur when people perceive that their group have less than what they are entitled to. There is, for me as a psychologist, there's one thing that I think of when I see the definition. That is what I thought when I saw it the first time. That is, my impression was, this is psychology. Every aspect of this is psychology, even group, because you might think group membership might be like, let's say, gender, males and females, our origin, Uppsala and Lund, and whatever. But actually, sometimes group boundaries are not exact. They are, and groups overlap quite a lot. So most of the time, I would say it's difficult to define the group. Even if you think of gender, psychologically, we don't, in psychology, we don't define gender as gender, male and female, and that doesn't mean that if you are male, you are absolutely a male. There is a gender identity. For example, you can be a male, but you are less male than someone else, or more male than someone else. So there is a continuity in the being male, or being someone from Uppsala. I would say, I am from Uppsala, but I moved here for many years ago, so I don't really feel that I am from Uppsala. So you can ask someone else, they will tell you another story, although they have been here almost the same period of time. Okay. What is psychology? It's feeling, because you can feel something, and we can, if I ask you, what do you feel about these glasses or this glass of water, I bet that you will give me different answers, because you have different things on your mind. So there's a variation in the feeling aspect, we perceive things differently. That is what every psychologist can tell you. And group, as I said, and what are you entitled to? We also might think differently in what we are entitled to. So some people think that, I am entitled to everything. Others can say, I'm just happy to have a seat here. I have nothing else. Okay. So there is a lot of psychology in group-based deprivation. If we put together this with how the situation of individuals with Muslim background, or Muslims in Europe, have been in the past, since I would say 11 September or 9/11, we can see that these there is some kind of discrimination. There are many reports. I don't want to go through them. Amnesty have a couple of reports about that. There are studies, scientific studies within each country in Europe that can prove that there is Muslims are in a way or another discriminated at, and they are in, and when they are not discriminated at, there is the ongoing political discussions in different places in Europe make Muslims feel uncomfortable. So that is the simplest reason to say that maybe could lead to some feeling of deprivation. Okay, then we have relative deprivation. It's a feeling that you are discriminated at. And we have Muslims that they can feel targeted, that if you are Muslim, you feel targeted by the discrimination. And we have also the idea of first and second generation, our Western-born and foreign-born Muslims. The difference between there are differences in many aspects between foreign-born and Western-born Muslims. But I would say the simple statement you can think of is that most Muslims who are born here in the West, they think, oh, they see themselves as Westerners, and but maybe are not all the time or most of the time are not perceived as Westerners, as they perceive they are not the real Muslim, but Westerners, but they are real in the way they think. So there's a perception of like you belong to a group, you feel that you belong to that group, but you are in a way or other pushed out of that group or away from that group. Again, there are studies about that. This is a conclusion from several studies that done, for example, in Denmark and in Sweden and in Norway, and in other different countries in Europe, for example, in Belgium. So what we did, actually, we thought, okay, we had an idea of, yes, there is a sort of discrimination targeting the Muslim population in the Western countries, and there are two groups that we can focus at, that they are foreign-born or Western-born. What we did a series of studies, actually asking different questions, but the studies we conducted is the first 3 studies, our 4 studies are, our participants were from different Muslim countries living in Denmark, Belgium, and Sweden. And we choose, actually, for example, Denmark and Belgium, we choose these countries because, not only because it's easy for us, because we were there to conduct these studies. Actually, for example, Belgium and Denmark were chosen just because they have exported most foreign fighters per capita in the Western countries. So there is like a huge interest for some Muslims to go to Syria and fight for something in these countries. And the Muslim population we looked at, it's diverse. They come from different countries, and some of them are born in these countries, in Denmark and in Belgium and in Sweden. Half of them nearly are born there, and half of them they came as refugees, like to these countries. And we had another study that we looked at Pakistani origin individuals with Pakistani origin who are actually living in a variety of countries or in different countries. I think we have 19 or 18 countries that we looked at, but most participants come actually from these countries, that is the UK, US, Canada, Germany, and Norway. So, and these participants, nearly half of them come from, are born, Pakistani origin individuals or Muslims are born in these countries, or they just have moved there. So, and what we did is that we looked at differences between these two groups and whether they identified themselves with Muslims, or how, in what degree they identified with themselves with Muslim, how much perceived injustice, their perception of injustice, and how angry they were on behalf of their group, and if they had any idea of, let's say, violent intentions to use violence on behalf of the group to defend, let's say, Muslims, or for the Muslims' case in that sense. So what we found in these studies, these are 6 different studies from different sessions, and actually done in the course of almost 2 years. As I said, in Sweden, Belgium, Denmark, and Denmark again, and in Western countries, the last one that I mentioned. What we found is that Western-born individuals were higher on all these indicators than foreign-born individuals. So Western-born Muslims were identified more with Muslims, they were more angry, they perceived more injustice, and they could actually think of using violence on behalf of their group. So the next step was to see, okay, how can we explain these results? The best explanation we found, we have different ones actually. The group-based deprivation, one of them, we have looked at socioeconomical factor, socioeconomic status and other things, and education. No one of them work as good as group-based relative deprivation. So when we introduce group-based relative deprivation, this connection or these differences disappear. So that means actually, if you to state it in non-statistical terms, that group-based relative deprivation explains all differences that we found between the groups in these variables. So it is actually the differences is because of the group-based relative deprivation. You might be critical, and you can be that. You are welcome to be that. But we had a couple of critical reviewers that were actually quite hard to satisfy. But anyway, they suggested a study that they thought, oh, this works, but this is a general issue for immigrants in Europe. So can you show us, or in Western countries, can you show us that this works on, this should not work on non-Muslim populations? So what we did, anyone knows what flag, what country is this flag for? Yes, okay, good. So what we did is actually we studied, we sampled a group of Sri Lankan nationals, or individuals with their background in Sri Lanka actually, living in Denmark. Also, almost half of them born in Denmark, and the other half were like migrated to Denmark. We did the same analysis, but instead of Muslim asking about Muslim identification, and so we asked about group identification. How much do they identify with a national group? And these were, of course, non-Muslim individuals, and we tried to see if group-based relative deprivation would work in the same way as it did for the Muslim groups. It did not. And we have also, just to add a study that we did after publishing this, is that we have another smaller sample that we have done this study on Christians, individual like with Christian religion coming from Middle East, we have looked at them and the differences between and how much they offer for their group, or how much they identify with their group, but we didn't find that group relative deprivation would explain anything there. So to summarize, what we found is that Western-born identified more with Muslims. This was actually a surprise for us. We didn't think so. So it's quite interesting in that terms that we took it as, although we have a quite good view of the background of the idea of the variables or the issue we are analyzing. So, and they showed higher feeling of injustice. They perceived more injustice. They were more angry in general than the ones who are not born in Western countries, and they express higher readiness to use violence to defend or on behalf of their group. And all these were explained. All these differences were explained by relative deprivation, group relative deprivation. This means, to bring you back to the person situation debate, this means that the context, that the intergroup context, how groups, the group dynamic in Western countries or in any place affects how people think and do and behave. And in this case, actually affects if their interest or their in extremism or violent situation or acts. There is. I talked about ironical stuff in the beginning. This is also in another aspect. Actually, it's the group-based inequality that might motivate Western-born Muslims to seek militant groups, for example, to go to Syria or in their home countries to act, to engage in extremism. The same dynamic, the same issues, I would say, drive their families home, away from their home, from their Muslim countries. So there is I would say, I don't know how to put this, but there is a dynamic in that process as well that they can contribute to a process that they are not feeling good about for the moment for themselves. I think there is time to talk. I have a few minutes more to talk about the personality aspect. I have a couple of interesting issues to tell you, so I do that, and then I can leave the floor for questions. I don't want to go to in detail to discuss about the definition of personality, but I just can say generally the personality for me, or as a personality psychologist, is within individual stable or within individual over situation stable characteristics. So if you are, for example, let's say extrovert, you should be extrovert in different situations, and according to this definition, and there is a stability that your extroversion is the same more or less today than compared with 10 years ago or in the next 10 years. And stability here, it's not defined in terms of mean scores. That means that stability actually is a group measure in this case, in a sense that there is a rank order stability in terms of that the ones who is extrovert here, the most extrovert one here will be the most extrovert one in 10 years. So, but you might change in terms of extroversion. For example, agreeableness change and extroversion change. When you are for example, my extroversion changed since I was a student, because actually I had more energy to go out to the nations and drink beer and have fun and do things. I don't have that energy today. My agreeableness changed. I was not so agreeable, but today I am more agreeable because I sometimes need help. And if I'm not agreeable, I cannot imagine how I can receive that help. So I need to be more active. So there are change in age, but the stability is within the group. If I measure you all, in 10 years, I would say I will predict who would be the most extrovert or most agreeable, and so on. Okay. The idea here with the personality studies that we are doing is that the same personality factors derive people's interest, our intention to use violence or to not use violence, or to use non-violent methods. What we did here is that we studied different groups from Denmark, Belgium, again, and Sweden, but also from Afghanistan. But we had also a group of, I didn't know that actually, this is the Mujahideen flag, and this is the I think this is their other flags. They have a couple of flags. So this should be their like youth organization flag, and this should be their original flag, I think. So we had a group of normal population from all these group of countries, including Afghanistan, and a group of former Mujahideen individuals. We have 58 of them in this study. There are higher numbers for other participants in other studies. What we could see, you don't need to focus on this picture, and I just can tell you that the same most of the time are the same factors that drive people to drive people's interest to violent or non-violent acts are the same personality variable. For example, emotionality, that is neuroticism. So high neuroticism makes you scared. You will not be interested in violent acts or an extreme environment. So low neuroticism and low openness. Openness is your openness to experience, is the way to see, let's say, your acceptance of things that are the way you see the world as an open place, and your mind is open for different statements, different explanations, and different way of seeing things. So these actually derive the violent intention. If people are interested in violent, they tend to be low in emotionality and low in openness. And if they have high in altruism, at the same time, that derive their non-violent. So if I ask you, do you want to donate or demonstrate for your group or do something that has nothing to do with violence to do for your group, that would derive your altruism will derive the amount of money, for example, you can pay, and your emotionality and openness would affect how much interest in violent act or situation you would show. So the idea here is to bring you back to the person situation debate, a broader contextual risk factor, for example, poverty. That is, in terrorism research, it's one of the key variables among researchers around the world. Like the poverty is a key determinant of extremism. Honestly, I don't think so, not in that as much as other variables. Discrimination, deprivation, these are contextual, let's say, contextual risk factors, are shared by many individuals who never turn to extremism. For example, there are millions of Muslims that are born in Western countries, but they are not interested in extremism. So why? What happened? What makes these others, or these few individuals, to be interested in extremism? We don't think that it's random that people suddenly get interested in extremism or extreme situation or on weapon or in any violent acts and so on. We think it's personality, and with this study we can show actually the same factors that drive Mujahideen to fight for something they believe in. The same factors drive the the interest or intention to use violence in Western Europe for any individuals. So we are trying also to replicate this for, actually we are working on to do the same studies on football supporters for different teams, for AIK and so on. So to see if they do more for their group based on these variables or personality factors that we were looking at. Back to the travel ban and a beautiful what a beautiful work can do. I think just to as a general statement, I think it's a quite. It's to make your huge problem very simple, to look at it in this way, to simplify things to much more than what is necessary. Actually, I don't think that a wall, or a fence, or whatever is used or done everywhere would help. Unless we understand group dynamics, but also unless we understand how personality works, how we can be motivated by our personalities to do things that are actually more extreme than yeah. Thank you for your attention.